Alright, well, welcome back to our video series on how to play chess. In this video, we're going to talk about how chess is actually won. Now, I told you in our very first video that chess is a very ancient game, and it also goes by another name called the game of kings. And that's because the king is the most important piece. So when you lose a king, you've lost the game. And so we have special names for when the king comes in danger and when the king is where he can't escape danger. So when the king is just put into danger, we call that check. And when the king cannot escape danger, that's called checkmate. We have another mate ending called a stalemate, and that's when the two sides draw. And we'll talk about how you can get into a draw towards the end of this video. So first, let's talk about a check. So I'm going to just load a standard board here, and we'll just play through a couple pieces. So I'm going to open with this knight, with this pawn on e4, and we will also move black's pawn to d6. Now I did that specifically so I could show you a check. So now my bishop, I'm going to develop my bishop to the square b5, and note that now the king is being attacked by the bishop, and this is called check. And if you look over here at the notation that is being kept up for us on the side, you'll notice that there's a plus sign there next to this movement of the bishop to the b5 square. That's what this notation means. And that just means that the king is now in check. And when the king is in check, everything else stops in order to get the king out of check. So if I click on one of any number of black's chessmen, you'll notice that none of the little dots come up to show possible moves, because there's no way this pawn can move now to get the king out of check. So something must be done to get the king out of check. And notice that the squares around the king are either blocked off by his own chessmen, or, as in the case with this square, it's under attack by the white bishop. So there's no place that the king can move to get out of check. So the only way that the king can get out of check is to actually block this attack. So in general, there are three ways for a king to get out of check: to move out of check, to block the check with a different chessman, or to take the piece that is threatening the danger. So we'll look at all of those. So here, there's no way for the king to capture this, or the black side to capture this bishop. There's no way for the king to move out of check, so we're going to have to block the check. And there's actually four pieces now that could, let me back up, there's actually four chessmen now that could block this attack. So I want you to look and see if you can identify all four of the chessmen that can block it. All right, so first and probably the most obvious is the queen. The queen can just simply move up, and you can see as I click on the queen, this dot highlights showing that that's a possible move. Now, while this is a possible block of the check, it's not a good choice, because the queen is the most valuable attacking piece, and behind the king is the most valuable piece on the board. So you know, if I were playing white here and black did that, I would go ahead and capture the queen, sacrifice my bishop in order to take the queen, even though this king or this other bishop can now take my bishop. So we wouldn't want to do that if we were black, but it's a possibility. We could block the check with the queen. We can also block the check with this other bishop. So we could just move this bishop here into this square and block the attack that way. And in fact, when we do that, we are returning the attack on this bishop. So now this bishop is either going to have to attack the other bishop on d7, or it's going to need to retreat in order to avoid being captured, or maybe we'll come up here and put a pawn up here in order to allow it to recapture those. But you wouldn't want to just sit here and move something else, or you're going to lose your bishop without a fair exchange. Okay, our knight can actually go in two different spots to block this attack. It can go to the c6 or to the d7 square. And either one of these will block this diagonal so that the bishop is no longer attacking the king. Okay, and our last chessman is this pawn. This c7 pawn could move to c6 and block this attack. So that is blocking a check. Let's also look at just the king moving from check. So again, I'm going to open up with this e4 opening. And this time we're going to have black move to f6. And then I'll just develop another piece, let's say d4. No, another pawn, and I'll have black open up this diagonal with the move d6. So now I'm going to move my pawn, develop my bishop to this same square, b5, and note that again the king is in check. And I still have all those ways from the last example that I could block this attack. I could block it with the queen. I could block it with this bishop, I could block it with the knight, or I could block it with this pawn. But I also want to just demonstrate to you that I could, in fact, just move the king out. Now, one disadvantage of moving the king here is that the king will no longer be able to castle. And we haven't talked about that move. That's a special move that is involved with the king and the knight. But generally, you want to be able to castle. You wouldn't want to move your king if you could find a way to stop the attack and not put yourself in danger through another method. All right, so we're just going to back up here, and I'll show you one other option. So it says, let's just make a move here so that I can get this pawn up. All right, so now all I've done is made this move h3 and the move a6, just to demonstrate for you that, again, I'm putting the king in check. Again, I could block with the chessman that I've showed you before. The king could move out of check, as I showed you before, but also another way to get out of check is to simply capture the chessman that is threatening the king. And so in this case, because this bishop is on the b5 and the b5 is diagonal to this pawn on a6, the pawn can capture that bishop and take the king out of check. All right, well, let's see a scenario where the king cannot escape check and there's nothing that can be put in front of the king. So let's reset the board and let's make some moves here. I'm going to get it open with e4. Let's have black open with f6, and white can follow suit with d4, and let's have black continue to make this pawn chain with g5. Now note what happens if I move my queen to h5. Well, you see that instead of having a plus over here, there's a pound sign, which is what we called it when I grew up. Maybe you're going to call this a hashtag, but this is the symbol for a checkmate. And let's see why that this is a checkmate. Well, the king, he's blocked in. He cannot retreat. All of the squares around him are either occupied by his own chessmen or are under attack by the queen. So just moving up here wouldn't get him out of attack. And there's no piece that can move to either of these squares that could block the attack. See, this pawn cannot move up. This knight, his free squares are f6 and h6. The rook only moves, back, up and down, side to side. So the rook is trapped right now. This bishop can move along this diagonal, but none of these moves can actually block the two squares that need to be blocked, f7 and g6. And finally, there is no chessman that can capture this queen on black side. So this would be a quick checkmate on the black side. All right, so this would be the end of the game, and black and white would shake hands and say good game and go on to a new game. So that's check and checkmate. And finally, I want to talk to you about stalemate. Stalemate can occur in 3 different ways. And anytime there's a stalemate, no matter how many chessmen have been taken by either side, it is a draw. It's a tie. So it can be advantageous for you if you are in a losing position, if you can find a way to tie the game, to draw to a stalemate, then you haven't lost. You haven't won, but you haven't lost. And there's 3 ways that you can get to a stalemate. What occurs most often is when there simply is not enough material on the board to force a checkmate. So let me just set up a position here. Let's say we have black king on g8, some pawns here on f, g, and h7. Actually, that's too many pawns for this. So let's say black has 1 pawn in front of him, and white has his king on g2 and a bishop on b2, and we'll check only legal moves, and so we're going to start. All right, so if it's white's move, now white can capture this pawn, and black can recapture the bishop. But even before the black king recaptures the bishop, we know it's going to be a stalemate, because a bishop and a king are not enough material by themselves. They're not powerful enough to trap this black king and put him in checkmate. So if this were a normal game and not in this analysis board mode, then the game would be over here. Now I can still move my king because I'm in an analysis mode, but this is a normal game. This would just be stalemate. So that's the most often how stalemates occur, is that we just don't have enough chessmen on the board to actually force a checkmate. The other 2 are a little more involved. The first one is called a 3-cycle rule, and I could probably demonstrate this for you by playing a drill for you. Let me see if I can pull up drills. Let me pull up a checkmate drill and do the 2 bishop mate. Now there's a way to mate with 2 bishops, but if you're not careful, you'll get into a draw, because anytime now black is being played by the computer right now, so I'm playing white and the computer is playing black. So anytime you repeat a position 3 times, then that is considered a draw. So if you come to the same position 3 times in a row, then that's a draw. Now black is actually playing not as smartly as black does normally when I'm playing on my phone, because I've gotten to this position too easily. Well, I can, let's see, I'll just continue. So I'm going to move my king here now that I've gotten, so I'm going to move my king circular in between, along these 3 squares. And if you've noticed, black's king is trapped in these two squares, D8 and E8. So black can only move back and forth here, and he can't move forward because the bishops form a pair that are guarding each other. So what I want to do is I'm going to continue to move my king. Actually, I'll just move my king back and forth because that will be faster. And as the computer moves, we're going to reach the same exact position 3 times in a row, and you see it stopped there, and it's giving me a chance to retry the drill because we just hit stalemate. So that's another way of reaching stalemate. The last way of reaching stalemate is to have 50 moves without a capture and without a pawn being advanced. So unlikely for just your average 2 people to reach a stalemate that way. Normally this is going to be some advanced players playing, but if you have 50 moves and no captures have been made and no pawns have advanced, then you can call it a stalemate there. Also, 2 players can just agree to draw. So a player can offer to the other player a draw, and they can just agree to a draw without having reached one of those 3 specific ways of getting a forced draw. All right, so that is how the game actually ends. So the goal of the game is for you to checkmate your opponent, and when you checkmate your opponent, you have won the game.